Welcome, everybody. Day 9 of the I'm Curious to Know project. Every day in May, going live at 3:30 Eastern with world-class athletes, innovators, and unique personalities from the endurance sports world. Today, I'm very pleased to have Katie with me, Katie Bolling, who's the VP of Sales for InGamba, a luxury cycling tour company. I'll let her give the synopsis on what InGamba does and the brilliant work they do. But Katie, it's fantastic to have you. How are you going?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Travis. I'm happy to be with you. Definitely not a world-class athlete, so I appreciate you inviting me on. But yeah, I'm in Colorado, and we've got sunshine today, and I was able to get in a Zwift ride and an outdoor ride, so doing well.
There you go. Now, obviously, we're all facing our own unique set of circumstances here during this global pandemic that we're facing, but one industry in particular that's been really hard hit is obviously the travel industry. But before we talk about that, I'd love to give you the opportunity to share a little bit about what InGamba does and the work you do and the trips you put together, and give us an idea of what you guys provide.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I'm with InGamba. For those of you that don't know what we do, we specialize in bike trips in unique parts of the world, mostly Europe and the U.S. And our founder, his name is Joao Correa. He was a professional rider, and upon retiring, he had lived and trained in a little town called Lecce in Tuscany, and decided, to try to bring the dream of what it might be like for a pro tour rider to the everyday rider. So that was about 10 years ago, and InGamba has been hosting bicycle trips ever since. And yeah, to your point, Travis, the travel industry has been hit hard by this. We're a fairly niche company and a very tight knit community. So it's it's been hard, but there's also been encouraging moments and really positive moments. And we have a tight knit community, as I mentioned, and it's been neat to continue to bring that strength and that family atmosphere to life in this obviously very challenging time for all of us.
Yeah, I've heard some really wonderful stories about how Joao came up with the idea and the beginning stages and some of the first trips. I'd love to have you share some of that history and share some of the folklore around how the trips came together in the first place.
Yeah, and obviously he'd be an excellent person for you to connect with as well. So maybe a future guest for you. But
yeah.
I know that Bill Gifford has done the trip, and I think he, his quote stands out among the many people who experience our trips, the greatest bike ride on earth. I feel like, and I think the way that the story went, and perhaps Joao will have the opportunity to share it himself, but he was with Ted King and kind of winding down his career with the Cervelo test team, and said, man, wouldn't it be cool to bring have a small group of people come to Lecce, and I can share this town and this place and do riding and kind of treat them to an inside view of what it is to be a pro cyclist. And from there, he sent out a tweet, and 4 people said, yeah, count me in. And I think a few months later, probably they were all in Lecce and shared this week together. And I think from there, people saw that and, asked him, when are you going to do that again? When are you going to do that again? And, originally, I think he thought it would be just a one-time thing. And then, okay, I'll do it again.
Yeah.
And a few trips down the road thought, well, this is what I really want to give a crack at this, and left the corporate world. I think at the time he was with LinkedIn to pursue this dream, and the original name of the company was Fat Man Tours. And he can share that story, but yeah, now 10 years later, here we are, and I've been formally with the company with InGamba for a little over 2 years. Really became involved when I was with World Bicycle Relief, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later, but also coming from the background of someone who has really experienced and traveled a lot of the world. Maybe a lot to some people, still a little bit to me, because I have such wanderlust and passion in exploring places and meeting people. But my first trip to Lecce was part of a World Bicycle Relief trip in 2015, and I arrived in Lecce, a very small town, by nightfall, and arrived at our inn, which is called the Borgo Lecce, and owned and managed by InGamba and a small tight-knit group of people there. And I just remember hearing like laughter and glasses clinking and this just warm aura. And I knew that I had found something really magical. And I've been obviously quite blessed and grateful to be part of the story there.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the origin of it. I had Caitlin Looney Landsberg on the show a couple of days ago. She started Sufferfest Beer, and she described the beginning of her business as a happy accident. And it sounds very similar to that with Joao and Ted, and they're, riding and having coffee and a beer at night, and all of a sudden they're like, yeah, let's try this. I think that's really a really fun beginning to the story. You mentioned, Lecky, some of the small towns, and obviously there's your business. There's many businesses that are impacted by this, but I've often thought, and I gave it some thought, around the small hotels, the restaurants you frequent, the hotel, the places, the coffee shops that you go to on these trips. These people rely on summer business. They rely on the business of people coming and traveling to these places and experiencing them. And they're going to struggle this year. Tell me a little bit about that. How are you staying in touch with some of those vendors and operators that you work with in these places in Italy and Portugal and other places that you travel to?
Right. Yeah. So as I mentioned, like Lucky is kind of our spiritual home, if you will, and where we do, again, it's a very small town in the heart of Tuscany between Florence and Siena. I believe there's about 35 residents there on an annual basis. Very small town and wonderful community. And obviously that's a country that's been hard hit by the pandemic. And obviously just, kind of embracing people at a time like this is really important, just staying in touch with them. We had an all-team meeting yesterday, and it was just nice to hear Inga's voice, who kind of runs our in there. And I feel like we're all kind of obviously all in this together. We're all making sacrifices for the many. Staying safe and staying healthy is the most important. Unfortunately, all the people that we know in that town are safe. And then, as you mentioned, we're quite active in Portugal. Joao is Portuguese, and the majority of our field team is Portuguese. So our guides, mechanics, soigneurs, a lot of our office team and accounting and design are in Portugal. And fortunately, Portugal has really had a positive experience the past few months in terms of minimizing the impact of the pandemic. I think Real recently Condé Nast listed as like the number 3 safest place in the world right now. Right. But our team is quite small. And as you mentioned, like we're visiting a lot of communities along the way during our trips that are also small. And we're a link in the chain, right? So we're all really in this together. And obviously on our business, our team is greatly looking forward to hosting people again and then bringing that business back to the operations around us, and that goes down. I remember a few years ago, a couple of us decided we wanted to have a stop for a Superbach in Portugal, and kind of looking in the doors and seeing who had one and what have you. So this is just really impacting all business sizes, and perhaps more close to home is the challenges the small businesses are facing around the world.
Yeah, it's tough. It's you're one of the most positive people I've met and had the chance to talk to and engage with. So I'm assuming that you're staying positive. You're keeping a positive vibe. You and the team are staying positive. But I know it's probably really hard. What are you doing to kind of keep the hope alive and keep the dreams alive and keep that positivity? And how do you foster that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, first of all, with like the InGamba community, we're a tight-knit group. I would say, some of the things that we've been doing as a community to kind of stay positive and tight-knit and keep that spirit, keep the community together. We're quite active on Zwift. We've been doing a few rides each week. And it's really great. Like this morning we had a ride, and I was on with Eros Poli and Manuel Cardoso and Bruno Pires. They're 3 of our guides. Eros, obviously, most beloved, one of the most beloved figures in Italian cycling, and then Manuel and Bruno, both Portuguese national champions. And we had a number of clients, that we've gotten to know well over the years riding with us, and then a host of new people around the world. So I feel like being part of that very, very strong global cycling community right now in that game and what Zwift is offering has also been like a really important part of this time for InGamba. And then, we're doing, Eros and I coined the phrase aperitivo anytime. He's willing to really have a drink with our community, like at 11 p.m. his time, just to make it work for happy hour our time, and getting some of our guests together and our close groups together over happy hour has been quite encouraging. And then similar to what you said, like with Joao and Ted, like having a cup of coffee and Lucky and, putting this dream down on a napkin. I feel right now a lot of us are holding tight to those things that we're passionate about and bring us joy. And a lot of it is quite simple, and we can make that environment work in the current time. I love the movie Shawshank Redemption. I think a lot of people do, and it's really, get busy living or get busy dying. And this is a time period where we're making adjustments and sacrifices, and obviously grateful for those who are on the front lines. Yeah. But we can still make those small choices each day, and having the InGamba, community be part of that still has been humbling, and I'm grateful for the group we have.
Yeah, well, we've had a couple of really great comments. Jared Boudreau here, a great friend of mine, Jared, said this is a bucket list trip for him. He once tried to keep up with Joao at the dinner table. Hope to do that again. Charlotte also mentioned a bucket list trip for her as well.
Oh, great. Yeah. Hi, Jared. Hi, Charlotte.
We've got Lance here, who's a fan of the show. He's here. Thanks for stopping by, Lance, again. I've also had the pleasure of meeting Eros. So Tom Fowler, another great friend of InGamba, a friend of mine, invited a group of us to dinner with Eros in Vancouver when I was living there at the time. And to say that he loves a glass of wine and a story would be an understatement. That was a really memorable night for me to experience that. So it just goes to show that community that you are fostering. I had Duke Stump. So Duke was a boss of mine at Lululemon yesterday. He was on the show and he talked about culture. He talked about building culture and building a business based on culture rather than just growth and numbers and those type of things. And I think that you guys do that really well. You do foster a culture of community. You've talked about tight-knit a number of times. And that's just not cliche. It actually happens within your organization. And I think that's hats off to yourself, hats off to the rest of the team for being able to create that environment for people to feel like they're a part of your operation and a part of your culture.
Yeah, thanks. It's funny. A couple of days ago, we had actually it was yesterday, we had like kind of an all team meeting, and obviously there's people calling in from the US, Portugal, Italy, Dubai, Madeira, and there's a little bit of a language barrier in our team. I think there's about 25 of us on the call, and the Zoom officially ended, but I would say over half of us just kind of stayed on. And you can't necessarily like have that chit chat when it's there's a language barrier, but we all care deeply for one another. I think that's something that's also one thing I'm really grateful for the group. And you mentioned like the dinner with Eros. Obviously, food and gatherings are a really important part of our culture at InGamba, and our trips they're really about riding, but they're also about togetherness. And a lot of that time shared at the table is equally. People are invested in that time, wholeheartedly in the food. And yeah, Joao was tough to keep up with it at a meal, and Eros with his wine, but we really love that togetherness. And one of the other things that we've been doing throughout this time, if one were to visit InGamba Pro and look at our journal, there's some recipes. We're quite grateful for Matt Accarino. He's a great supporter of the brand, and a lot of people know his name in food and cycling in San Francisco, and that's been positive. Hearing a lot of people cooking and spending time in the kitchen is kind of an extension of InGamba, and that visualization, everyone around the table, right?
How have you personally been able to put your own DNA and spin on the trips? Obviously, there's trip designers, and Joao probably has a really big impact on that, and the guides play their part. But how have you personally been able to kind of put your imprint on on the organization and the trips and the experience since you started with the brand?
Yeah, that's a great question, and maybe best like to ask other people. I would feel I really love community building and building connections, and even throughout the past few months, I've been able to kind of connect InGamba people that I feel would get along well, or finding and shaping trips where I feel okay, these couple of people would enjoy going on a trip with them. I think I'm able to do a few trips per year, and I am grateful for any chance to get into the over to Europe and meet people and kind of see what's, bring it to life, right? And that the enjoyment of getting to know someone that's interested in a trip and helping them pair to a trip and then being with them on the trip is something I'm really grateful for when I have that opportunity, and sometimes friendships develop, which I'm also grateful for. But I do love the time that I'm able to visit the communities in North America, or like where our clients live, and spend time in their community and build connections with them and do a local ride and grab a beer and a coffee. And so I feel in the time that I've been here, I've been able to do a lot of that. Obviously that's on hold right now, and miss it quite a great deal. But bringing to life that InGamba spirit that people feel hopefully experience on the trips at a little bit on this side of the pond.
Yeah. You do some trips in the US. I know that the business is mainly focused on Europe, but you do some domestic travel. Do you think that will be something that you'll put a little bit more emphasis on now, given that people may not have the ability to travel overseas or travel to Europe as freely as we potentially have in the past?
Yeah, we're quite nimble and small, so that's a benefit of being a small company, is we can also look and say, okay, how can we best serve our clientele, and where and when, and what have you. So certainly looking to do some more domestic programs potentially this summer. We'll see what happens. And then we do have trips, as you mentioned, in the fall. We do a program in Healdsburg, so hopefully that will still happen, and who knows, maybe an opportunity to expand on that at the end of the year. And one of the benefits, it's something I've always loved about InGamba, but perhaps is really important now, is we run trips with fairly small groups. So our average size of our trip is somewhere between 8 and 12 guests. So operating in a pretty small environment, and given the current situation and trying to be respectful of large gatherings and what have you, I feel that that's going to be a draw to what we are able to offer moving forward, and a very comfortable small environment.
Yeah. I have a feeling that experiences like InGamba are going to be even more sought after eventually. Once we get past all of this, I think that people are going to realize that seeing the world and getting together and doing the things they love and having adventures and experiences are even more valuable than they were before, because we all spent so much time now in lockdown or quarantine or in our communities, that we're going to want to spread our wings a little bit and go and explore and have experiences.
I would totally agree with that. And I've been really find it to be kind of lovely, the amount of that message that I'm receiving from people on our side as well. Like both new guests who have reached out and said, I've always dreamed of doing a trip with InGamba, and now I realize I want to, now is a good time to really start focusing on that dream, because no one, you never know what tomorrow is going to bring, right? And then at the same time, like obviously our very engaged community is very much looking forward to coming together again, and also supporting us. We're very, very humbling to receive notes from people, say we're here to support you and can't wait to be able to travel with you again. And then just like the purity of the experience, right? And realizing during this time, like all these little things that really are important to us and that fuel our soul. And I feel we do an exceptional job on celebrating those parts of life. So and I've never taken for granted. I'm one of those people that, arrives at the airport with plenty of time to just like experience the human drama and just observe people. And I love going to airports and getting a meal and watching. And and then arrive, you know, that lovely feeling of anticipation when you're going somewhere new, and it's something not to take for granted, right?
Yeah. Well, you and I are the complete opposite on that front. I arrive with 33 seconds to spare. And I'm always the guy that's just like looks flustered and like they're going to miss their plane and is running through the airport. So you're probably watching me going, look at this guy.
Oh, I think my least favorite in the world is the feeling of being rushed. So, you know.
Well, we can agree to disagree on that.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about this because you mentioned to me earlier that this isn't really the first time you've been through something like this. You were in the travel industry when 9/11 happened, and you know, you told me a story of how that business you were in kind of rebounded and regrouped and come back to life. But I'd love to get a kind of a snapshot from you of, you know, what that experience was like the first time around when travel was severely impacted.
Yeah. So I guess to rewind the story is I was fortunate. I was able to study abroad in college and kind of always have dreamed of experiencing and traveling the world since I remember, you know, since I was a little kid. And so I did that. I traveled, you know, studied abroad. I love that experience. And after I graduated in accounting and finance, and I decided that I wanted to do another trip before I lined up a formal job. I worked at Target in Minneapolis as an analyst, but I took a loan out and went backpacking in those few months between graduation and starting that job. And it was during that trip that I thought I really need to do more of this. So I went to work at Target for a year, saved up all my money, and then I left for about a year and a half and roamed the globe. And when I got back from that last leg of that trip, I had a snail mail letter from a friend of mine that I'd studied abroad with. He lived in Chicago, and it was just this cutout of a new travel company, .com. You know, this was in 1999, a huge 2000, that was launching in Chicago that was funded by National Geographic and a lot of the large private investment companies. And I saw that article and I thought, I'm driving to Chicago and I'm going to get a job there. And I did that, and I wound up in Chicago, and it took me about 9 months, but I was hired at iExplore, the adventure travel company, in the accounting department. And a few months later, you know, 9/11 happened, and our top selling destinations were Egypt, Israel, Jordan, small ship cruises to very adventurous parts of the world. So really the bottom fell out. And at the time there was about 100 of us working there, 75 or 100. And we were supposed to close on a round of financing of around $3 to $4 million on September 12th. And obviously that didn't happen. So, you know, we kind of made it through those couple of days following 9/11. And then the following week we were all laid off. And I think I went traveling to Netherlands for a few weeks just to kind of restore myself. Am I going to stay in Chicago? What am I going to do? And a few months later, the CFO there called me and said, I'd love to hire you back. I'd like to start a software company. We've been able to kind of secure a bridge loan. Yeah. Would you be willing to return, and I can, you know, train you and pass this job on to you? And I was very grateful for that chance. And so that's what happened. And I worked with the CEO and a very small number of us to kind of see if we could rebuild the company. Yeah. And in those few years, we did a lot of armchair traveling. Like, there was no industry money for familiarization trips, but I just remember hunkering down as a community and helping to rebuild the tourism that had fallen off kind of a cliff.
Yeah.
And, you know, the stories of those mom and pop operators that I worked with there, sold or safari or cruise, small ship cruise or expedition or cultural trip, that type of passion that I saw in those operators is now the passion that I'm part of in InGamba. So I think it was really a warm experience to be able to see the world kind of regain its footstep in international travel, especially adventure travel to destinations where their tourism had completely been decimated, and rebuild it. And knowing now we're in a situation where there's going to be a lot of, I think, really cool programs around rebuilding tourism following.
What lessons will you take from that experience that you'll be able to implement into what you're doing with InGamba? Like, is there a, have you been scratching the archives in the mind of, okay, what can we put in place? What are the things that we can do that you've been through before to help regrow?
Yeah, some of it I think will be around, and obviously this is an extremely different experience than 9/11, but it's somewhat comparable in that fallout of the travel industry in different ways. But in those few years after iExplore, it was really at iExplore, it was very nice to work with those international tourism bureaus. So working with various countries and regional bureaus as well, and the programs and the money that was directed towards building tourism was really positive. And I think the same thing is going to happen here. You're seeing a little bit of that, like even with Sicily doing some unique things to drive domestic tourism there. So that'll be, I think, quite neat to follow. And then the resiliency of obviously like people who are passionate about their business and want to band together, and everything from working with Matt, who's, like giving us some insight to recipes and all of that. Like he's got a business as well and he needs to rebuild it. So I feel, that kind of locking arms mentality is definitely going to be part of the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I've got this general sense of kindness. I feel like people are more open to share. People are more open to connection. They're more open to help each other. I just have, I feel like there will be so many positives that will come out of this. Obviously, there's some horrible things that are still happening, and we're still in flux. But I have a general sense that we're all going to come out of this more connected as a human race, and I think that's going to be a positive that we can all share in.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, there's like we're really all in it together. It's not like any one person or group has further insight than the rest of us, and it's a very unique spot, I would imagine, in our lifetime and in recent history, where everyone has compassion and understanding for what everyone else is going through. There hasn't been necessarily a time like that that's relatable. And my children are 14 and 9, and particularly like my 9-year-old, I've had to tell her a few times, like, this is my first time going through this.
Yeah.
Wow. And it's interesting through the 9-year-old, like she's a little competitive. And at the start of this, she kept asking me, do you think anyone's doing social distance as well as we are? And, then you watch like the movies and the videos, and everyone this is just, some of it's just kind of overwhelming in terms of like emotions of the heart, right? Yeah. Seeing that wave of humanity in such a beautiful way.
What are those conversations you're having with your kids? Like, our kids are young. My daughter's 3. Our son's almost 4 months. So my daughter talks about the virus. I don't think she necessarily understands, but your kids are older. So there's probably conversations or thoughts that they're having that you're having to reconcile and share insight with them. Like, what are some of those conversations that you're having?
Yeah. So with my son, he's 14 and he's kind of, he's quite happy. He's a little bit of a homebody. And, he's been focused on getting his homework done and all of that. And then he's enlisted himself in like all sorts of projects around the house. So tiling and grouting. So he's at a very different age and he understands the news, what have you. It's really the 9-year-old. I think she's in a maybe that 6 to 11 age group where it's just kind of difficult to grasp maybe everything that's happening. I've noticed that she wants to be closer to me. I try not to be gone, even my bike rides when I go outside, try to be close to home, that feeling of like, there are children and it's our duty to protect them.
Yeah.
And a real, instinct, I'm sure, for all parents out there, and being close to home. And I really sense that she's in that age where she wants that feeling of safety.
Yeah.
Considering the confusion that's going outside beyond, her knowledge of things. But at the same time, like the time I travel a substantial amount, and I love that. But when I'm home, I'm usually really trying to be present at home. But this has been an extension of that. So the amount of crafts and activities and time together, we've been able to do things. And I've taken long walks with my son, and he'll ask, let's go further. And he drove into Denver with me to pick up some Cinco de Mayo food for a little just kind of fun celebration here. And I ended up sharing, he asked me about music when I was growing up, and I ended up telling him about mixtapes and like what we had to do to like listen to music. And so, you know, you just realize like, wow, you're having conversations with people that maybe sometimes that time slips by, or, you know, what you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, you know, you're having that time with him and you're able to share stuff, and we'll never get this time again. Like we'll never, you know, you talk about not traveling. You know, the same, I can't remember the last time I was home for 8 weeks in a row or 9 weeks in a row. And it's just been so refreshing just to have those moments and not have to worry about where you need to be, because this is the only place you need to be. And just being where your feet are has been an amazing opportunity that I'm super grateful for.
Yeah. And maybe one thing that I noticed, and something that I try to really stick with outside of this current time, is when I ask people how they are, oftentimes, you know, the quick answer is a sigh and, oh, I'm so busy. And a recognition that a lot of it is busyness that we create that doesn't necessarily need to be there. So perhaps, you know, a recalibration of time and energy. And even, you know, I mentioned this call we had with our team. Eros is at his little cottage with his wife Michelle in Venice, and behind his screen there was a little bike with a picnic basket and a bottle of wine. I was like, man, like Italians, like they just look like they're in tune with like these things that sometimes we you know, kind of maybe see as only available in our imagination, but we can live like that, you know. And I think it's a good time for all of us to kind of reconvene in terms of, okay, how do we reshape ourselves for the better going out of this?
Yeah. I have some questions on that at the end of the show that I think I'm really looking forward to your answers to those questions. But it's really along those lines of like, what are we recalibrating to, and what can we keep and what can we let go of? You did allude to World Bicycle Relief. You spent quite a bit of time there. You really, from what I can gather, really had an amazing impact on that brand and that company, or that not-for-profit. Excuse me. How does that experience sit with you? And then now, like, obviously, InGamba is a big fundraiser. You do the World Bicycle Relief trips. Tell me about that connection, and tell me about how meaningful that is to you and the work that you were able to do there.
Yeah, it's a huge part of my life, and I've been fortunate like that. I spent 10 years at World Bicycle Relief. For those of you perhaps listening, it's an organization that's dedicated to distributing bicycles into rural parts of the world where bicycles can be used as critical access to education, job opportunity, and healthcare. And my background, Travis, as you know, is I come from Ironman background and always did some humanitarian-based fundraising as part of that. And when I went to Hawaii, I decided I wanted to do something a little bit larger. And at the time I was living in Chicago, and I learned about this infant organization that was distributing bicycles into Sri Lanka after the tsunami. And I thought that's a very worthwhile cause. And the cool thing about World Bicycle Relief was that the infrastructure in terms of designing the bicycles themselves to ensure that they're the right bikes for the community. And at the time, I was the first person that had kind of come to them and asked to do a fundraiser. And I remember writing, like, the founder's name is FK Day, and his brother Stan, they're the founders of Stan. But I said, "Dear FK, I'd like to do a fundraiser for your organization." And he wrote back, and at the time you couldn't really even do a fundraising page. So after Hawaii, and when I realized really nobody in that Ironman environment had learned about World Bicycle Relief, I said, you could consider hiring me, and we could start a grassroots network. And that happened in 2007. And then, I spent 10 years building that organization. I think strategically, it was a huge confidence builder for me, that being there from the ground up and seeing where it was able to go to. And it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, a couple of times people have said to me, fundraising's easy. And kind of look at them. It's very difficult, especially in the humanitarian sector. But, you know, it's very cool. In around 2013, Joao had approached World Bikes Relief about what he saw as an important element to InGamba. And then we started working together on that partnership. And so it was really neat that I was able to meet a lot of the InGamba community and have that, you know, experience on a trip that kind of led me where I am today. But I think one thing that I really focus on and I think about every day during this period is we all know and have compassion to what happens when access is cut off and that the jobs and shopping and schools. Like we have this shared global compassion. And that's the story of everyday life in rural Africa, where there are so many barriers to reach school, to have an even access to healthcare, to reach a good market, to work and receive an income. So, my great hope right now is that there's going to be more understanding of compassion and interest in supporting their work going forward. And obviously, the InGamba community that's involved with World Bikes Relief has been very vocal in this time and listening to what World Bikes Relief is doing in Africa right now for COVID prevention. But I think the long-standing opportunity for all of us to have greater compassion for access is pretty alive right now.
Yeah. Tell me about the experience of going into these communities and providing bikes and seeing people's lives being changed right in front of your eyes. Tell me about the feeling you get by being able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, first of all, I've got my like Pinarello F10 behind me, right? And we all know and love that new bike day, right? There's hardly anything like it for those of us who enjoy cycling as a sport and hobby, and then multiply that by 1,000. And the energy is indescribable at a distribution. I've been fortunate to be able to attend bicycle distributions in a few parts of Africa and Colombia. But the anticipation and what it means to these communities when you're bringing 200 bikes to ensure that girls have an equal opportunity to finish their education, and seeing everybody gather for those distributions with their best clothing on, like dresses and songs and poetry, and the stories about how the bicycles will truly, truly change lives. It's, you know, it's unfortunate that one thing that I used to say is like, it's just, you can't, you know, just kind of plop yourself into rural Zambia and have that experience, but it's something that I carry with me every day.
Yeah. I just shared in the comments that people will be able to see. I don't know if you can see it. I just shared a link to the piece that we did on you a little while back on innervoice.life, and some of the photos that were in there, these amazing images of you with these kids in Africa and you know, showing them the bikes and kind of running through that. Like, I loved looking at those pictures. I stare at them for hours, just looking at the faces and the joy and the like, also the like confusion and the curiosity, and just it was an impactful image, and I shared that. So if people get a chance to look at it, go and check it out. But yeah, I love that story. I'm so proud of you and the work that you were able to do to provide access to those folks.
Yeah, and I think it shows we're all connected, because I believe how we originally connected, Travis, was through Jordan Rapp.
Yeah.
Who, you know, was obviously very dedicated to World Bikes Relief, and I think that you became involved with one of the fundraisers. So it was always a joy to be able to go to those distributions and say, so many people care about your well-being who can't be here and don't have this opportunity to experience this in person. But I sometimes, you know, I'll go back and look at those images a lot. And again, particularly right now, I'm thinking so much about those communities in that mission. And for myself, you know, the high percentage of the work at World Bikes Relief is really dedicated to mobilizing girl students.
Yeah.
And ensuring that girls around the world have equal access to opportunity. And so I was a voice for them. So it's been an important reminder to myself to be the absolute best for myself as well, because not everybody, I think I mentioned this in that piece you did, like 1 in a billion. Not everybody has this type of life where they have choices. And, I have that tattoo passion on my wrist where I've been able to like really forge my life around passion versus need.
Mm-hmm. Love it. How does that show up in your day-to-day now? You mentioned thinking about it, which is great, but how does that need and passion show up now?
Yeah. I mean, I think particularly in this times, like in the current situation, is just finding that joy and motivation and reminder that not everybody is as fortunate, and your world is, it's relative to what you've experienced. And I've been fortunate to have that insight to what life is like in some pretty rural parts of the world where there's this high degree of need. And I'm reading a book right now called Atlas of Happiness that kind of goes around the world looking at different countries and kind of ethos around happiness and quality of life. And I feel like there's some real substantial merit to, I think a lot of the experts say, like, somewhere once your basic needs are met, so for a US that's around a $50,000 per year, where you have a roof over your head, food, what have you, then there's no proof that happiness increases based on, monetary income. Mm-hmm. So I have those needs met, and then all of the joy that I find in life mostly comes through experience. And whether it's creating like experiences in the home right now that we're all doing right in our neighborhood, in our street or apartment, or what have you, versus the fulfillment that I get a lot when I'm traveling. But it's all essentially like kind of self-created, right?
I love it. I believe in it so much. I'm a big fan of Shauna Core, and I've read The Happiness Advantage over and over from front to back, side to side. And it really, to me, talks about how, people assume they're going to be happy if they get that promotion, or they buy the new car or the new watch or the new bike or what have you. That's going to bring them happiness, but it's actually not. It's not the case. And that's what you describe. There's opportunities once your basic needs are met that your happiness and your joy can come from many different forms. Do you think you're naturally a happy, joyous, passionate person, or is it something that you kind of have to remind yourself, and there's a practice that you go through to continue to bring that up in your life?
Yeah, I feel that some of it's practice. I have always been mostly rooted in passion, ever since I was small. So I think that's just like a core fundamental part of my life, and I've been fortunate to be able to follow it and kind of live it and try to bring it. I think like there's that book, like you either care a lot about something, kind of all in, or nothing. And I the things that I'm passionate about, I really try to pour myself into, and that is pretty joyous in itself.
Yeah. Love it. I'm excited to hear your answers to these questions. As I mentioned, I asked 3 questions at the end of every show. And I'm going to launch into them now. I'm very excited to hear your answers. What's one thing that's changed for you during this isolation period that you really want to keep once we go back to this new normal?
Yeah, so I've been reading in the morning and reading at night. The reading in the morning is a nice part of a newer part of the routine during this time, because typically I'll wake up and more it's around getting the day started, getting to work, getting the kids ready for school. So I've appreciated more of that kind of quiet time in the morning. And even this may sound silly to some people, but I've taken great delight in, I do French press coffee, and even just hearing the coffee pour into a cup, it's just a little simple thing that I've never really stopped and listened to and appreciated. But every morning now I kind of like enjoy looking forward to that, pouring the coffee and then, having a book in hand for a little bit of time.
Love it. Second question. What's one thing you thought was important before isolation that you're happy to leave in the past?
Probably I've been cooking more at home. So I don't know if it's important, but just taking more time for that cooking at home. and leaving behind more. Some of it's the waste that comes with going to, grab food and what have you, and just recognizing like it's good to kind of keep an eye on that pattern.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a new one. I like that as well. We were cooking at home quite a lot before this, but and I do miss like going to a restaurant and what have you. But I'm happy to limit that because there is so much value around sitting around the dinner table or the breakfast table or the lunch table as a family and as a unit, and like having those conversations and not feeling rushed and not having constant noise and whatever else happening around you. So I get that. I feel you on that one.
Yeah, but I'm still running into Denver to get the Maine lobster rolls from like their one main restaurant. So I do still want to support the small restaurants, but
yeah, well, I do miss lobster rolls too. I'm like, I'm not gonna lie. I'm jonesing for a lobster roll. What's been your most memorable moment of joy during this isolation period?
Probably that increased time with my kids, but there was one moment I was getting ready to do a Zwift ride, and I would say like I've also been more better at staying dedicated to doing a Pilates routine. Like I'm trying to do that 3 times a week in addition to riding. But I was getting ready for this one of our Zwift rides, and I was downstairs kind of getting my bike set. My daughter, her name is Holland, was with me, and she said, "Oh, Mom, you're so strong. I wanna be like you." And it goes back to like just having a little bit more time together. But especially I guess maybe with Mother's Day, that's on my mind being tomorrow. But having that focus time and really embracing that time with my kids has been very special.
Yeah, amazing. You mentioned Mother's Day. I wish you an amazing Mother's Day tomorrow. I hope you have a fantastic day. I committed to having these shows every day in May, and as a clause in that, I had to make sure that I brought in my super mom wife, Lauren Phillips is going to join me tomorrow. We're going to be doing a little show together. I'm excited to have her join me. But yeah, shout out to all the mums out there. Have an amazing day. It may be a little bit different from what you used to with Mother's Day and the ability to celebrate with extended family. But I hope you all have a great day tomorrow. And Katie, this has been a joy to have this conversation with you. I'd love to pull together an inner voice trip for InGamba and come and bring a crew together and experience what you guys are up to once this all moves.
Yeah, I would love to have you, Travis. That'd be pretty cool, and I'm even pleased, happy that you even have that idea, and a very happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there, and to Lauren as well.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Awesome. Enjoy, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Travis.
Okay, take care, Katie. See you soon.
Bye.